Hey everyone, and welcome to Make Business Better from Quartz. I'm Zach Seward. Last year, we took Quartz private, and suddenly Quartz, after 9 years, was once again an independent media startup. And that's been incredibly exciting, liberating, all that jazz, but it's daunting too. And so with these shows, I've started turning for advice to executives at other companies that are working to make their slice of the business world a little better in some way, and of course are willing to come on this show and share some tips that we can all apply in our work and lives. For today's episode, which is the season finale of the first season of Make Business Better, we're going to talk about a term I'm sure you've been hearing a lot about, stakeholder capitalism. It's totally fair if you couldn't give me a precise definition of it. I'm going to put our guest on the spot for that definition. It's Frank Cooper, CMO of Blackrock, who has quite a lot to say and I think has been out on the forefront of helping define stakeholder capitalism, sort of transforming it from a thing that you say at Davos to make sure you know what you're talking about or you're with it, to something that really is real and meaningful. So that's their goal for today, is to take a bit of a buzzword and make it more meaningful for all of you. And as always, before we get to our guests, we want to start with the Quartz essentials on today's topic, where I'll take my stab, or Quartz's stab, from our own reporting at defining stakeholder capitalism, and then Frank can tell me if I've got it right. So the term really took on prominence and became more mainstream back in 2019 when the Business Roundtable, which is a group of CEOs in the US, made a pretty dramatic statement, which was that companies don't exist simply to maximize value for their shareholders, but also need to take into account the needs and responsibilities toward other stakeholders, such as their customers, employees, the environment, and other social responsibilities that any business that's worth its salt is going to be intertwined with, whether they like it or not. I think by 2019, this wasn't necessarily a controversial statement, but it was a big and important one, and to my mind indicated a sea change in how big business thinks about its responsibilities to everything but making money. And since then, we've also seen a lot of evidence that what's driving this is consumers. People are increasingly demanding that companies they buy products from or financial services from or what have you are also driven by some kind of purpose. And study after study, including the one you're looking at right now, shows that consumers are generally much more likely to purchase from a company and return and recommend it to their friends and so forth if they identify with and see clearly the purpose of that company, again, beyond just making money for that company's shareholders. So that's my best attempt at stakeholder capitalism, but I'm not the expert. Today's expert, at least, on the topic, as I said before, is Frank Cooper. Frank is CMO at Blackrock, responsible for all of Blackrock's global brand and marketing strategy, and before that was CMO at companies like BuzzFeed and Pepsi, before taking this role in 2017. Frank, thank you so much for joining us.
Zach, thanks for having me. I'm really excited about this conversation.
Yeah, and before I get you to critique my definition, we've started a whole season. I've mostly been working from home, and so have most of my guests, trying to get to know where we're all coming from in a literal sense. This is a little different for this episode because we're both working, it turns out, from the office. But tell me a little bit about where you're coming from.
Yeah. So I'm here in Midtown, and I got to be honest, it's strange to me to be in the office because I had everything set up at home. I'm so wired at home. Like I know where everything is, the lighting, the computer, the Wi-Fi. It's all set up beautifully. So now I'm in the office, and very few people are here right now. But I'm starting to adjust. And behind me, which is something I love, is our visual identity system. And there's someone in our graphic design department who took our visual identity system for Blackrock, iShares, and Aladdin, and created art pieces out of it. So I love these pieces.
Yeah, that's very cool.
Yeah.
I've heard a lot about Sonic branding. MasterCard's made a good deal about that. So I don't know, maybe you should sell those prints. Well, I am also in Quartz's office, a little south of you in the Flatiron district, and also very lonely. There's just a few of us here, and feeling definitely what you're saying. Hybrid work is actually going to be more complicated. I need two really good setups, not just one.
100%.
Well, let's get to today's topic. I'm sure you would disabuse my introduction of you as the expert or greatest champion of stakeholder capitalism, but I know you've been called on to talk quite a lot about it, and I think that's because you're quite articulate on the subject. In particular, I think at getting to what we really mean here, because as I said at the start, there's high risk of buzzword tune out, like this is meaningless. But I, to be clear, I do think there's meaning here, and I know you do too. So let's start. Did I get that definition right, or better yet, how would you define what stakeholder capitalism?
Yeah, I love your definition of it. And look, I'm on the journey just like you and everyone else, and just trying to learn and explore and build together. But look, for me, the definition of stakeholder capitalism, the first thing for me is to remember that it's a rejection of the Friedman doctrine, of, Milton Friedman's famous statement, at least how people have interpreted it, that the sole purpose of a corporation is to maximize profits for shareholders. Complete rejection of that. And it's saying there are other people who have essentially invested and should be served. Employees, vendors, customers, communities, the planet, and of course shareholders. And so that's kind of the awakening, or maybe it's a renaissance, kind of going back to what we've had before, where you have that sense of responsibility. But to me, Zach, that's the easy part, right? Which is, okay, now I'm supposed to serve all these stakeholders, and they have different motivations and interests. The question is, how do you balance those competing interests, and how do you navigate that? That's the hard part.
Yes, absolutely. And what does it mean? It's easy enough to say I care about my customers, of course, but what does it mean to what are the shifts that the company is going to actually make to put customers at the center of what they do, or the environment at the center of what they do? So let's talk about that in more specifics then. Obviously, you can only do what you have control of, which is marketing at Blackrock and working with your colleagues across the company. How has Blackrock been thinking about this, especially over the last year and a half during the pandemic?
One of the biggest shifts we made was we talked about purpose, and Larry Fink, our chairman and CEO and co-founder, put purpose in one of his letters. He sends out a letter to CEOs every January, to about 1,000 or so CEOs. He talked about purpose, but one of the things we did, we said, we actually want to make purpose real for us. And Zach, I think that's the biggest step we took that changed everything. And so what we did is we said, okay, let's define, what do we mean by purpose? Let's discover our own purpose. Let's articulate it. Let's embed it in our organization. Let's take those steps and see where it leads for us, because we felt like if we didn't live that, how could we ask anyone else to do it? But it had a secondary effect, which is to go beyond just stating the purpose and knowing the purpose, but then changing the way we operate. And embedding it into strategies and innovation and philanthropy and marketing. And so if I look at what is the pivotal moment for us, it was a couple of years ago when we started that journey of trying to make purpose real within our company and throughout our operations.
And I want to get to your CEO's January letter, which was, I think, quite notable in staking out new priorities around environmentalism. But what was that journey like? If it started a few years ago, and to the extent you can summarize it for us, where did you end up? What is the purpose of Blackrock?
Yeah, so our purpose, where we landed, is this idea: we help more and more people experience financial well-being. And it sounds really simple on the surface and maybe not even distinctive. But for us, this idea of financial inclusion, helping more and more people, and financial well-being across the full spectrum of money, right? So how people earn it, spend it, save it, invest it, and give it. We felt like there was a opportunity for us to rethink how we give people greater access, greater knowledge and skills, tools to build a healthier relationship with money. And so that became our sense of purpose. But the step we took that I think accelerated it was that we focused on an inside out approach. and we started with the employees. Before after we came up with a statement, and we worked with employees on that, by the way, also.
Mm-hmm.
But after we came up with a statement, the key for us was helping everyone in the workforce find a personal connection, an emotional connection to that purpose statement. It could be in their job, it could be through an employee network, it could be through social impact or philanthropy. But finding that personal connection was key, because what we've seen, and what I've seen too, is that it's impossible to sustain deep purpose if your employees don't have a personal connection to it. It's just a poster on the wall at that point. It's just some words that they say. And so that was key for us.
What did those, I was going to call them sessions, but I suppose I shouldn't assume. What did those sessions, or what did that work look like with employees around the company?
So we started with a series of interviews, and we interviewed over 100 employees across different regions, different functions at different levels. We then did what we called the Blackrock Jam. It was a 3-day event where everyone came online, and we just talked about peak moments. Like what are the moments where you felt like you or you saw someone within Blackrock contribute in a way that really kind of energized you, it made you feel uplifted. And so we did that, and we ran some algorithms against that to see what words popped up and what were the key themes around that. And then we devised a workbook. And this workbook is really based on that whole kind of Japanese concept of ikigai, right? So, combining what you love to what you're good at to what the world needs, et cetera. And so we had people go through this workbook individually at first. And what happened organically, we started to see purpose parties pop up, pre-pandemic, people would say, I got a purpose party. I'm like, what's a purpose party? And next thing you know, they would gather a group of people. Sometimes a fairly small group, could be 10 people. And they would talk about their purpose and have a conversation about it with wine or food and drinks. And that became this organic energy within the company around finding your personal purpose and connecting it to the company purpose. And the thing that surprised me the most, though, is this: the most hardcore analytical, this is probably BS kind of person, were the ones who had the biggest breakthroughs. They're the ones who started off saying, "This is not real," because what do I like to do? I like to ski. I like to hike. I like to bike.
Well, I was also picturing a particularly skeptical employee being like, well, I got to sell some ETFs here. That's what I'm here to do. That's my purpose. I have to imagine they may not have said it to you directly, but some people had to be thinking it.
No, that's definitely true. And the answer to that is yes. You have to sell some ETFs, and the question is, can you do it in a way? Can you frame it in a way where you actually have more energy and more fulfillment? If you knew that selling ETFs gave people greater access to the market and gave them greater exposure to different areas, or helped countries actually raise money, would you feel better about it? Would you feel more energized? Would you feel more connected? And the two are not mutually exclusive. You have to perform. There's no doubt about it. But the question is, how do you perform at the highest level over long periods of time? It's usually not money alone that's going to do that. It's usually not status. There has to be some sense that you're contributing to something bigger than yourself. So why not define that? And that's kind of how we tried to crack the code. And I'm sure Zach, we didn't get everyone, but we got a large number of people who felt like, this is actually pretty cool and interesting and motivating.
Yeah, I think that's an important point. They're sometimes portrayed as in opposition to each other, like business success and purpose in business. And I think the reason it's a complicated question is there has to be some tension between the two, or else it's not real. Like that, you have to be willing to change what they're doing as a company and give up something, usually, even if your long-term strategy is this is better for our business. And so I'm curious, what through this journey, what are some of the ways in which you ended up changing how Blackrock operates to better align with the purpose of financial inclusion?
Yeah, it's great. It's a great question, and I'll tell you. First, just as leaders in the company, that tension that you touched on is something that we started to become more comfortable with, and realize that you can't escape that tension. It's always, first of all, there's a tension across the stakeholders where not every action you take won't kind of apply evenly across employees and customers and communities and the planet. And so you have to you have to kind of lean into this notion that it's going to be uncomfortable. There's going to be ambiguity, and you kind of hold your purpose at the center. But sometimes you're toggling long term and short term, in a particular action. But you're always keeping your purpose at the center. So that's kind of the first part. But yeah, go ahead.
Right. I mean, and you're holding, and then as a result, you're vulnerable to being called hypocritical or be called out for that. And I think that a major reason why companies don't take these steps, or do it in a superficial way.
100%. But look, you have a couple of choices. You could say, you know what, I'm going to just stay out of this because it's too messy. I don't get it. And my answer to that is good luck, because what we're seeing is not just customers. It's actually employees who are increasingly saying, I want money, I want status, but I want to feel like I'm contributing to something bigger than myself. And the younger you get in that employee pool, the more willing they seem to be, at least right now, to just walk if you're not stating some sense of purpose. So that's one. But the second thing is this: that inaction is no longer free. If you want to remain neutral, you don't want to navigate stakeholders. It's not like the other stakeholders are remaining quiet, or they have no power, or they have no voice. They do, and they're going to speak up. So you're in this mix of multiple people, multiple stakeholders who are having conversations about your company anyway. And the question is, do you have the capability and the proficiency to navigate that and to hold these tensions in place, but also have the courage to say that I know at times there will be some stakeholders who don't feel like it's good enough for them in the short term, but in the long term, you have a large enough percentage of them that believe you're doing the right thing. It's a tough situation, and there are no easy answers to it.
Well, I'd have to. Financial firms have a particularly complicated set of stakeholders over which you both it can exert influence and also are beholden to, and it's I have to imagine that makes it all the more complicated.
Yeah, but the beauty is, look at what happened during the pandemic. When the pandemic first hit in 2020, many people said, "Wow, sustainable investing is going to suffer." Because we're in the middle of a pandemic. There's a lot of uncertainty. People are going to regress. They're going to retreat back to what they know, and the opposite happened. If you look at these sustainable funds, they outperformed their parent indexes, and so. But also this value shift that we've seen, I think, is permanent and increasing, and it applies not only to employees or customers, investors are actually increasingly embracing it. And our position is really simple. Take the environment, for example. We think that climate risk is investment risk. And so from our position, it's our fiduciary obligation to actually pursue this, because we're essentially saying that we have not priced in sufficiently risk. Investors in general have not sufficiently priced in risk when they climate risk when they look at investments. And so for us, it's part of our fiduciary obligation. One. Two, it's core to our purpose. And three, we think employees, customers, investors are all lining up behind this. And this whole notion of the values action gap is closing. People are actually walking the talk.
Let's talk more about that when it comes to the environment. For our viewers' sake, could you mind just quickly recapping what your boss announced in January?
Yeah, so Larry Fink over the years has written a CEO letter, and it has weight because we manage a lot of assets, right? We manage $9 trillion of assets, and Larry's been using his voice and the company's voice increasingly to promote long-termism. And so you've heard things like purpose and diversity, equity, and inclusion, but the sustainability conversation really took off. And essentially what Larry said in his letter, in the first one, is that when you look at climate risk, that is investment risk. And we have a fiduciary obligation to make sure that we make sustainable funds more available, that we use our voice and our leverage with companies in which we invest to nudge them in the right direction. So we engage them, and sometimes we vote in ways that encourage them to go down that path. But we believe that environmental sustainability and climate action are necessary steps to protect the long-term assets of virtually every company.
The one thing that concerns me looking out the next 5-10 years, in particular when it comes to this area we're talking about now, ESG investing, is when you're totally right. ESG funds outperformed the market and defied expectations, but maybe it's because not as many airplane stocks, oil stocks that were particularly hit hard in the mix. What if next year they're laggards to S&P? It's still the right thing to do to invest in a more sustainable future. But you got a profit to make. I worry about it not standing up when it's harder to make those kind of calls.
I worry about that too, actually.
Sure.
I don't have the answer. I don't have the crystal ball on this one. I will say this though. I will say that the energy, the conversation, the conviction that I hear from multiple people, including investors, including clients, is that they believe that it's the right thing to do. They believe that it is the best for long-term investing, and there's a deep commitment across many large-scale clients to continue to pursue this. And I also look at some of the partnerships that we are developing. Like the partnership with Temasek, and the decarbonization partners that we've developed, or investing with Bill Gates in his fund. These partnerships are not temporary kind of fly-by-night ventures. These are kind of deep actions and significant steps for us that it would be difficult to unwind. And so I do worry about the logic that if it doesn't produce the return that I expect at any given moment, I will retreat from sustainable funds. But that's not what I'm hearing, at least in the circles that we're traveling.
Right, and I suppose, well, obviously the market will determine it, and if there really has been a permanent shift in consumer attitudes, which I agree with you on that, then it is likely to be more durable. And that reminds me, you wrote a piece recently in LinkedIn that struck me, talking about there's certain periods of society where there's I think the word you used was a rupture, and that could you expound on that a little bit more for viewers? And I don't want to ask you more questions about it, but we might as well set up the premise of that piece you wrote.
Yeah. I think in that piece I was saying that, like every major social crisis, it reveals the fractures and the tensions that are just beneath the surface, and it amplifies it and it accelerates it and makes it more visible. And that's exactly what happened here in the series of kind of overlapping crises that we saw in 2020, from the COVID-19 pandemic to the crisis of racial inequity, and so that revealed those kind of deep social fractures. And what's interesting this time, for me at least, is that it's forced companies to reckon with it in a way that they never have had to do before. And so we're at a critical juncture, I think.
Yeah, and well, maybe we turn to, we've been speaking primarily about environmentalism, and clearly that's been a focus for Blackrock. But maybe a good place to end would be the crisis of racial inequity in the U.S. We're about a year removed from, one, and most importantly, the murder of George Floyd, but also the statements and commitments that so many companies made in the months following. And I mean, Fast Company and the Plug did a pretty good piece trying to assess how much they've held up to it. But anecdotally, I would say I've actually been impressed by the durability of those commitments. At the time, it was easy to be skeptical that this was what companies felt they needed to say in the moment, and didn't really mean it. But anyway, that's my assessment. I'm much more interested in yours. How do you feel a year on, looking outside of Blackrock, just at some of the other companies?
Yeah. Well, let me say three quick things. One,
Sure.
S in ESG is the most difficult part. It is messy because it includes racial inequity and wealth inequality, and it includes labor rights. It's just a bunch of issues, and you could go down that rabbit hole and never come out, right? So a lot of CEOs are afraid of the S because it seems like a never-ending set of issues with a moral underpinning. So I think that's tough in and of itself. Around racial inequity, I agree with you. Look, everyone had a town hall in June of 2020. Everyone put out statements, and I was skeptical also. But I have seen also the durability of it, and I think the intention and the intentionality is pointing toward, let's try to do our part in solving this. And survey after survey is saying this is what people expect, employees expect it, communities expect it of companies. But where I think there's a fault line and maybe the opportunity is, in order to really change it, to change racial inequity within a company, you need two things. One, you need managers who have a new set of capabilities. They have to be able to see the potential in people who are not like them. And that's a new set of skills, like motivational listening and humble inquiry. It's a whole new set of skills they have to develop in order to say, I see the potential in this person. I can give this person the benefit of the doubt. And I recognize my own limitations in terms of feeling comfortable with someone who maybe like me. That's one big part of it. And the second part is this, is that the commitment to racial inequity outside of the building is not purely a philanthropic activity. It is also what contributes to productivity inside the building. You have some employees, before they even open the door to your office, they're carrying in a load, because racial inequity plays out in so many different ways. It plays out through their family members. It plays out with their interaction with police. It plays out with the kind of the slights that they might experience throughout the day. And if you can reduce those negative currents, you have an employee who's coming in and a workforce that actually can reach greater potential after that. So those are, to me, are the two fault lines that I think we have to address if we're going to really get off of this plateau of wanting to do better, of wanting to advance racial equity, but really making a difference.
For when I think about these questions you're raising, I'm a big believer that capitalism is the best solution to our environmental crisis, and that we can come up with, we could save the planet that way with greater investment. I'm less convinced that capitalism can be the solution to racial or economic inequality, but it doesn't mean we can't try.
Yeah, exactly. And look, I mean, capitalism has evolved many times, and I think all we're saying is we're now at a place where it needs to evolve again.
Yep.
And I think it has the capacity to do it even around racial equity.
Totally agree, and that's a good place to leave it. Frank, I really appreciate the comments, and I made a passing dismissive joke to Davos in the beginning, and well, I know you'll be there whenever it's next in person on some panel. I most of the time when they're talking about these topics, I think it's at such a high, unspecific level, it's rendered meaningless. And I appreciate that you're willing to go much deeper and admit that it's an imperfect journey, and that's kind of the point.
Thanks, Zach. I really appreciate it. Enjoyed the conversation. Let's stay connected.
Yeah, will do. Thanks a lot.
Okay.
Well, that's it for today's episode and this first inaugural season of Make Business Better from Quartz. I really appreciate you tuning in today, and for all of you who've been watching all season long, appreciate your loyalty. Would love to hear from you, by the way. My email address is just the letter Z @qz.com. We're going to spend the summer preparing for a second season, probably do things differently. Just like everything else in the world will be different by the September when we come out with season 2. Would love to hear what you'd like, whom you'd like to hear from, what you'd like to hear about, and so forth. And in the meantime, I hope those of you in the Northern Hemisphere have a great summer, and vice versa, winter in the Southern Hemisphere. I'll see you all back in September. Follow Quartz on all of our platforms in the meantime. And of course, make sure you're subscribed to the Daily Brief to start your morning each day with the best roundup of global business news from Quartz. I'm Zach Seward. Have a good one.